There are very few stories that survive long enough to become part of multiple generations' identity. Star Wars did. For nearly 50 years, people have carried these stories with them across generations. Parents introduced it to children, friends bonded over it. Entire careers, conventions, communities, and lifelong friendships formed around a fictional galaxy far, far away, which is why conversations surrounding Star Wars today feel so emotionally charged. Whether we want to admit it or not, Star Wars still matters to a whole lot of people. And the story stopped just being entertainment and became personal. And now, with Mandalorian and Grogu bringing Star Wars back to theaters, it feels like the franchise is standing at another crossroads. Not because every fan needs to love every movie or every series equally, but because many people are still searching for the feelings they had when Star Wars first captured their imagination. That emotional connection is the part of the conversation that I think gets lost online. So much of modern fandom discussions today become trapped inside algorithms that reward outrage and tribalism and conflict and instant emotional reactions. I've done it. And you know what? It turns every discussion into winners and losers, real fans versus fake fans, or shills, or, original fans. It's like there's a whole group of people that love and hate to talk about Star Wars, and that's okay. And you know what? Those arguments, they are endless about whether Disney destroyed Star Wars or whether fans ruined Star Wars or whether Lucas handed it off to Disney DOA. But I think the real question is much more interesting than that. And that question is, why do people still care so much? Why does this story still matter to so many people after nearly half a century? And maybe even more importantly, what happens when mythology becomes corporate infrastructure that is meant to be monetized far, far beyond the halls and walls of the mouse house? So let's face it, Star Wars was never, ever just a product. Whether it was meant to be or not, it never was. At least I have to believe that it wasn't originally thought to be a product. It was a movie, it was an experience, it was something that a bunch of guys decided they wanted to do because there was nothing else that they wanted to watch in the theaters. And this brainchild came out of George Lucas. And you know what? One of the most fascinating things I have learned while talking with people like Craig Miller, who helped to shape the original marketing campaign for Star Wars, or Garen Daly from the Boston Science Fiction Film Festival, is that early Star Wars fandom, it wasn't treated like a demographic category. It was treated like a relationship.
We went to conventions. We encouraged involvement from fans. It was the pre-internet, pre-digital video, and all that kind of days. But we encouraged conversation. We started the official Star Wars fan club, which was aimed more. It was believed it would be more young kids joining it, but in fact, um, we wrote the newsletter. I wrote the newsletter, and it was all articles about how the films were made and interviews and things like that. That I thought, if I wasn't there at Lucasfilm, what would I want to know? And we treated, and so we had a lot of, you know, teenagers and adults subscribing to the Star Wars fan club to get that kind of information because we didn't have the internet.
That part of the story really matters, especially with the launch of the first Star Wars film in years. So, modern fandom culture, it didn't just magically appear one day online. Star Wars existed long before the internet and long before social media algorithms were here to feed the fire. Star Wars fans have been organizing conventions and newsletters and cosplay groups and fan groups and discussion spaces for nearly 50 years. Fans built communities around shared imaginations. And Lucasfilm, especially in those early years, they understood how much that relationship mattered. That's one of the reasons the original trilogy resonated so deeply with audiences. It arrived at a moment when people were hungry for mythic storytelling again. So, what social need is the Mandalorian and Grogu rising to meet? That is the catalyst that connects Star Wars as a universe with fans right now with this film. This is something that George Lucas himself talked about repeatedly. Star Wars pulled heavily from mythology, westerns, Kurosawa films, Flash Gordon serials, Joseph Campbell, and classical hero narratives across the board. But what made it special wasn't the references, it was the emotional sincerity behind them that we connected with from generation to generation to generation. And above all, the films believed in hope. They always believed in hope. That sounds super simple now, but culturally, it mattered. And I still think it matters today. The late 1970s were shaped by political distrust, post Vietnam cynicism, Watergate, economic uncertainty. I mean, you name it, we were experiencing it, and it was visceral. And a growing sense of disillusionment just kind of embedded itself within society. That was the generation that I was born into. Science fiction before Star Wars often leaned into colder, darker, or more cynical stories. Then suddenly, there's this strange little space fantasy that arrived that told audiences that heroes, they could still matter and that hope was still relevant. People responded to that, not because the effects were revolutionary, although they were, but because of the emotional architecture underneath the story, it worked. That's something I've talked about repeatedly on this channel, especially in discussions around adaptation, storytelling, and why audiences emotionally disconnect from certain modern franchises. Spectacle alone, it's not enough. It's never enough to sustain a prolonged relationship with fans within any story's universe. Again, technology alone, it is not enough. I can't say that loudly enough. Visual effects alone are never going to fill that void. It's the people and their stories that ultimately matter here. There has to be meaning and emotion for us to connect and to care for those characters enough to feel something when they are in danger of failing or succeeding. The idea of it, it just connects directly to some of my earlier discussions about Andor or Star Wars Rebels or The Acolyte, and even films outside of the science fiction genre entirely. Audiences may forgive imperfect effects, even limited budgets, or even pacing if they emotionally trust the story being told. But once that trust erodes, audiences begin pulling away, even if they can't fully articulate why. That emotional trust is where I think The Mandalorian succeeded as a series when it first premiered. What I think it got right in that first season is that it understood its own scale and that not every story needed to determine the fate of the galaxy. Sometimes Star Wars works best when it leans into smaller stories in an intimate way to look at a farm boy on a desert planet or a lone bounty hunter or, hey, even a child, a small frontier community, or I don't know, characters who are just trying to survive in the shadow of these larger historical events within the universe. This series, it reminded audiences what living inside Star Wars universes actually felt like again, at least in that first season. And I think that emotional sincerity is actually part of why Grogu became such a phenomenon almost instantly, especially for kids, because there was something about Grogu that kids really could identify with very easily. Grogu wasn't embraced because of lore or tradition or massive storytelling. Grogu worked because audiences emotionally recognized the relationship at the center of the story. A young child was in danger and he needed help. That story has universal appeal. That's important, but it also taps into the idea of hope. An emotionally grounded storytelling creates attachment faster than any amount of spectacle and special effects.
Going back in time into my time machine and getting out in the 70s in Cambridge, Massachusetts, um, there was an excitement about film back then, I'm not sure whether that was something that was felt across the country, but it was definitely felt in the Cambridge, Harvard Square area, where film was considered to be a place where you learned about culture and you experienced with everyone. It was a community center. And I think what Star Wars did bring to it was it brought a community that had been very underserved and was basically, non-existent to some people, and brought them together in a community. And all of a sudden they found out that there were other people like themselves, and it became much more of a fandom.
One of the things I find fascinating now is how fragmented modern fandom has become. And we are seeing it again with the release of The Mandalorian and Grogu. Back in the original trilogy era, fandom communities were smaller and they were slower and they were more communal. Today, fandom exists inside AI recommended systems optimized for emotional escalation. As a result, outrage spreads faster than reaction, joy, or hope. Anger performs statistically better than nuance. And since entire ecosystems financially reward people for keeping audiences emotionally activated, and I mean to use the word activated, outrage and disillusion, they pay the bills. That environment changes how audiences experience stories because humans, we are raised to trust our friends, and the internet makes people we admire and watch feel like friends. I mean, I know I feel like friends with a lot of the viewers on my channel because we chat down in the notes. And I see you on other channels as well, and we chat there too. And honestly, I think it changes how studios react to audiences too. Because once fandom becomes heavily monetized, and have no doubt about it, we are monetized from every direction. Fear started creeping into this creative process of storytelling. Studios, they begin reacting to discourse cycles instead of trusting long-term storytellers and how to tell a story. They respond to, you know, the issue of the moment and build that into their next stories, which usually come out 4 years from now, making it not the issue of the moment any longer and completely out of touch and out of sync from what's being kind of discussed in daily discourse. Fans are accused then of ruining everything and then become increasingly defensive because, hey, you know what? They feel emotionally protective of the stories. I know I do. Every new release arrives carrying the weight of decades of emotional expectation and new levels of heightened social anxiety. That's an incredibly difficult environment to create anything inside of when you feel like you have to please literally everyone. And you know that is impossible.
No, every story is not going to appeal to everybody. And there's a lot of people who have built a feeling of ownership within whatever it is that they are deeply a fan of, Star Wars or whatever. And they want everything from that. Um, I hate to say use terms like this, but from that IP, from that universe, to be a story that relates to them as much as the first one that won their heart. But when you're building out something as broadly as the Marvel universe or the DC universe or Star Wars, not every story, not every focus is going to appeal to everybody. I loved Andor,
Me
the
too.
that series. Um, I'm not as crazy about Mandalorian.
Which brings us back again to The Mandalorian and Grogu. I don't think this film needs to save Star Wars. And honestly, I think that framing like that actually hurts the conversation as a whole, since no single film can carry that burden. So, no, The Mandalorian and Grogu, it won't save Star Wars. It can't save Star Wars. But you know what it might do? It might entertain a whole new generation of fans because it is clearly designed for children. And it also might create a moment for parents and kids to enjoy a movie together when you, as a parent, can see the delight and wonder on your child's face, just like you felt when you were a kid and your mom and dad saw you in the theater. That's what this movie might actually produce if we give it a chance. I can't say, I don't know. I haven't seen it. I can't get into a press screening. I'm not going to see it until I get back from Australia in, the second week of June. So I don't even know that I'll be doing a review for this film unless you guys want me to do a review for this film. But I really wanted to talk about The Mandalorian and Grogu because I do think there is something important that this film is going to add to fandom, and that it is likely not going to be a film that everyone is going to roundly love. But I do think there will be people who love it that will get brought into the Star Wars fandom universe. And I do think that this movie represents something much bigger. It represents an opportunity for Star Wars to reconnect with audiences emotionally rather than simply expanding itself structurally. For years, Hollywood operated under the assumption that bigger automatically meant better. Bigger stakes, bigger mythology, bigger crossover events, bigger timelines, bigger lore. But audiences eventually start craving intimacy again because we need variety, we need connection. That's part of why smaller emotional moments inside massive franchises often resonate more than these universe ending conflicts that we get. And ironically, that brings Star Wars back toward the thing that made it work originally. It's the simple emotional storytelling inside the mythic structures that operate best in that galaxy far, far away, where a farm boy stands on a ridge staring out at two suns, a father who failed badly and finally has the chance to redeem himself through love, and a lonely warrior who was once an orphaned child is given the chance to protect another orphaned child. Those moments endure because they speak to universal experiences. They speak to human truths underneath the science fictional layer of the story. That's the part of Star Wars that I think audiences are still searching for and even reacting to. They're not looking for perfection. They're not looking for ideological agreement, not even necessarily consistency, even though that would be nice. We want connection to hope and to salvation and to love. And maybe that's ultimately why conversation around Star Wars still becomes so intense, and why we are seeing audiences already divided by The Mandalorian and Grogu before it is even released. People are not simply arguing about content, they're arguing about emotional ownership of the stories that helped shape who they became.
But there's another thing here that I wanted to kind of address, and that is the timing of all of this. Because when you go back to 1977, it is the post-Vietnam period. And I think what George Lucas and Joseph Campbell did very well was to tap into the fact that there was no mythology out there, and they created a mythology that the masses could adopt and enjoy, that was updated for them to be able to like see and experience and put it on screen. And I think that part of that entire culture of the new mythology and the Joseph Campbell hero's journey and all of that made it so much more accessible for fans to really get engaged, especially after a very dark period in the US history.
When I look at The Mandalorian and Grogu, I don't just see another franchise installment. I see a test, not of whether Star Wars can dominate the box office again. I don't really care about that. But whether it still understands the emotional cinematic language that made audiences fall in love with this universe in the first place. And honestly, I think that question matters far beyond Star Wars itself because we are entering a cultural moment where audiences are increasingly overwhelmed by content and algorithms and I don't know, constant digital noise. People are craving stories that feel human again, stories that feel emotionally sincere and authentic, stories that remember that audiences are people first and consumers second. And most of all, stories that are fun and full of wonder and provide bridges to bring generations and families and friends together and back to the theater for another shared adventure. That may ultimately be the real future of blockbuster storytelling if studios can ever figure it out. Not bigger worlds, but more honest ones, better worlds, worlds that mean something to you and to me. And if The Mandalorian and Grogu understands that concept, then maybe Star Wars still has something meaningful to say to audiences after all these years. And that's how you save a franchise. Thanks for being here, everybody. Please do give this discussion a thumbs up and subscribe if it helped. And while you're here, I'd love to know what Star Wars means to you personally, because I think that emotional connection is the real story underneath all of this. I'll see you all again soon. Until then, happy viewing. And I would actually like to know, do you want me to do a review of The Mandalorian Grogu when I get back from vacation? I've got some different videos saved up, some different reviews in my pipeline to share out during my vacation, but I won't be able to do that one until at least the second week of June. Maybe that's too late. Maybe not. Let me know in the comments below. Tell me if I should do it or not. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. And if you went to see this movie without me, I forgive you. All right. But I would really love to know what you think of the movie as well. Did you like it? Did you not? Were there any parts to it that you really enjoyed? Was there something that you connected with or even connected with your family on when you went to go see it? Let me know. All right, that's it for now. Please do give this video a thumbs up if this was helpful to you at all. And I will see you all again soon. In the meantime, happy viewing. Bye for now.